The story begins with a businessman traveling on a train. He is on his way to an important meeting, but he gets distracted for a moment and misses his stop. He gets off at a station far from where he should be. He quickly calls his assistant to tell her what happened. She tells him that waiting for the next train will take too long and suggests taking a taxi. The businessman never reaches his meeting. Later, he is seen somewhere else holding 2 small bottles and some tablets. He looks worried and uncertain, then takes 1 tablet, swallows it, and immediately collapses, dying. The next day, the news reports that he poisoned himself and died. A month later, 2 friends are walking in the rain. The girl has an umbrella, protecting herself from getting wet, but the boy is soaking. He tells his friend he will go home to get an umbrella. It is revealed that he also had 2 tablets. He takes 1 and dies alone in the rain. The media reports this as another suicide, and people begin to worry that something strange is happening. Soon, another woman is shown at a bar drinking too much. Like the others, she has 2 tablets. She takes 1 and dies immediately. The media reports it widely, asking questions and speculating about the cause. The police hold a press conference to explain the situation. Detective Greg tells everyone that all 3 deaths were suicides and that each victim died after taking the same poison. Reporters ask if someone could have poisoned them on purpose, but Greg says there is no connection between the victims. When asked if it could be the work of a serial killer, he avoids answering directly. Suddenly, every phone in the room receives a message at the same time. Everyone, including Greg, sees the same message. It reads, "Already know who I am," signed by Sherlock. Greg recognizes the name, but nobody knows what it means or why it is sent. The story then introduces John Watson, a retired army doctor who served in Afghanistan. During a fierce battle, he lost all his fellow soldiers and was badly injured, leaving him with a permanent limp. After leaving the army, Watson struggles with both his injury and the mental pain from what he saw in the war. He goes to therapy to cope with his trauma. His therapist suggests that he try writing about his thoughts online to help him understand and deal with his feelings. One day, while walking in a park, Watson meets an old friend named Mike. At first, he does not recognize him, but Mike quickly reminds him of their past friendship. They talk about old times, and Mike learns about Watson's current difficulties, like how he struggles to live alone after his roommate left for England. Mike mentions that another friend is also looking for a flatmate and offers to introduce Watson to him. Watson is led to a hospital laboratory where Sherlock Holmes is working on a scientific experiment. Sherlock immediately notices Watson's injury and correctly says it happened in Afghanistan. Watson is shocked that a stranger can know such a personal detail. Without much conversation, Sherlock also predicts Watson will need a flatmate and explains personal habits, like playing the violin at home to think. Sherlock shows he can understand Watson's life, his problems, and family situation just by observing him. He gives Watson his address at 221B, Baker Street, leaving Watson amazed and curious. That same night, a girl in a pink dress is shown taking a tablet from a bottle. She swallows it and dies immediately. This becomes the 4th mysterious death, adding to the fear and concern already spreading in the city. The next day, Watson visits Sherlock's apartment. He notices that it is in a great location and guesses the rent must be high. Sherlock explains that the landlady, Mrs. Hudson, gives him a discount because he helped her husband before. Watson also explores Sherlock's website, The Science of Deduction, and is amazed by the information he finds there. Sherlock demonstrates how he can learn detailed personal information about people just by observing them, their jobs, past experiences, and family matters. Watson realizes that Sherlock's abilities are not guesses or tricks, but come from careful observation and logical thinking. Mrs. Hudson comes into the apartment, scolding Sherlock for leaving it messy. She shows them a newspaper, pointing out that 3 people have died from the same poison. Sherlock looks out the window and notices a police car arriving. Calmly, he remarks that the 4th death has already happened. Detective Greg enters and confirms Sherlock's observation. He says there is evidence at the scene and asks Sherlock to come quickly. Sherlock agrees, but refuses to ride in the police car, choosing a taxi instead. Greg nods and leaves. Sherlock becomes visibly excited because the fourth death gives him the clues he needs to solve the case. He tells Mrs. Hudson to clean the apartment while he is gone. She reminds him firmly that she is the landlady, not a maid. Watson sits quietly and asks Mrs. Hudson for a cup of tea. She responds with her usual firmness, saying she is not a servant. Watson smiles and politely asks for 2 biscuits with the tea. While waiting, he reads a newspaper to pass the time. Sherlock returns and talks to Watson, mentioning his army experience and asking if he will accompany him to the crime scene. Mrs. Hudson leaves with Han, reminding Sherlock about the tea once more. Watson watches them leave, curious about Sherlock. Sherlock notices and asks if he has questions. Watson wonders who Sherlock is, what he does, and where they are going. Sherlock challenges him to guess. Watson guesses that Sherlock might be a private detective. Sherlock corrects him, saying he is a consulting detective, the only one of his kind in the world. He invented this role, and the police consult him when they cannot solve a case themselves. Sherlock reminds Watson of their first meeting, when he knew he had been in Afghanistan. Sherlock proves how he can deduce facts by observing people. For example, Watson's army-style haircut shows he was in the military. His calm reaction to lab equipment shows he is a doctor, specifically an army doctor. Sherlock also notices the color difference on Watson's wrist, which proves he spent time in a hot country like Afghanistan or Iraq. Watson becomes even more amazed at Sherlock's abilities. Sherlock explains how he figured out details about Watson's family. By looking at Watson's phone, he noticed it was expensive but worn out, showing that someone else had used it before. On the back, there was a note that said, "Harry Watson, from Clara." Sherlock guessed that Harry was Watson's brother and that he had some trouble in his marriage. The scratches near the phone's charging port showed careless use, probably from drinking. Watson is amazed at how Sherlock can learn so much just by observing small details. They arrive at the murder scene and step out of the car. Sherlock asks Watson if his first ideas about him have changed. Watson corrects Sherlock, saying Harry is actually his sister, not his brother. Sherlock looks surprised for a moment, but quickly moves on, already focusing on the scene. At the crime scene, they see the body of a woman in a pink dress. Before dying, she had scratched the word rake into the wooden floor. A forensic officer explains that it is a German word meaning revenge, and says the victim is a German woman named Jennifer. Sherlock, annoyed, disagrees with the officer and begins his own careful investigation. Sherlock examines Jennifer's body carefully while Watson watches closely. He tells Detective Greg that Jennifer is not from Germany, but from Cardiff. He explains that her dress is wet, meaning she was caught in the rain, but her umbrella is dry. This shows she had an umbrella, but didn't use it because strong winds stopped her. Checking the weather records, Sherlock confirms that only Cardiff had rain with strong winds at that time. He notices marks on her right ankle, showing she was dragging a wheeled suitcase. This suggests she traveled a long way to meet someone. Sherlock also deduces that she had a secret lover. Her wedding ring is old and dull, showing she was unhappy in her marriage, but her nails are sharp and clean, meaning she doesn't do hard work. The shiny inside of her ring shows she often took it off, probably to meet her lover. Watson is amazed by Sherlock's detailed observations and reasoning. Sherlock explains that the word rake was probably meant to be Rachel, not revenge. To solve the case, they need her suitcase, but it is missing. Greg says the house has already been searched, but Sherlock insists it must exist somewhere nearby. Sherlock becomes tense, realizing the suitcase could have been hidden or taken by someone. He thinks aloud. The killer brought Jennifer, killed her, and probably left her suitcase somewhere nearby. Suddenly, Sherlock notices something pink, an important clue, and rushes off. Watson is left behind, frustrated, trying his best to follow. Outside, a police officer questions Watson about his connection to Sherlock. Watson explains that he just met Sherlock and is not really his friend. The officer warns him that working with Sherlock is dangerous, unpaid, and could ruin his life, but leaves the choice up to him. Watson continues walking, uneasy from the warning. He notices a pattern. Every telephone booth he passes begins to ring. Curiosity takes over, and he answers one. A voice tells him to look at a nearby camera. Shocked, Watson sees that every camera around him is tracking his movements. Someone is watching him very closely. A car pulls up, and Watson is told to get in. Inside is a young, beautiful woman, but Watson fears he might have been kidnapped. The car drives to an old building, where a man holding an umbrella greets him formally. Watson asks why he is there. The man says he is Sherlock's enemy and offers Watson money to spy on Sherlock, assuming Watson is in need. Watson refuses firmly. At that moment, Sherlock sends Watson a message telling him to return home immediately. The man comments that Watson's calmness shows he misses the war, not that he is stressed from it. Confused, Watson insists on being taken home, and the man obeys. Once home, Watson informs Sherlock about the encounter. Sherlock dismisses it, but confirms that the man tried to bribe him. Watson insists on focusing on the Jennifer case, asking why Sherlock left him alone at the scene. Sherlock instructs Watson to use his phone to send a message to a specific number, saying it is part of plan. Sherlock shows a pink suitcase, clearly Jennifer's, and explains how he found it. The killer had left it in his car and later discarded it near the crime scene. Sherlock searched every nearby trash bin and finally recovered it. Watson asks how Sherlock is sure it belongs to Jennifer. Sherlock explains that the pink color matches her dress, and the clues they had found earlier also pointed to pink. Sherlock also points out that Jennifer's mobile phone is missing. Watson guesses she may have left it at home, but Sherlock rejects this. She had a secret lover and would never forget her phone. Sherlock plans to send a message from Watson's phone to scare the killer and make him react. Watson is amazed that Sherlock can manipulate the killer using Jennifer's own device. They move to a restaurant near where the killer is expected. The owner, grateful for Sherlock's help in the past, offers them everything for free. They wait quietly. Soon, a suspicious taxi arrives. Sherlock quickly realizes the killer used it to avoid being noticed. When the taxi leaves, Sherlock and Watson follow, but Sherlock is briefly hit by a car, letting the taxi escape. Using reasoning, Sherlock predicts the taxi's alternate route and intercepts it through a shortcut. They find that the taxi occupant is not the killer, but a newcomer to London, carrying luggage from the airport. Sherlock apologizes and explains the mistake. Back home, Sherlock tells Watson that a gift awaits him outside. It is Watson's walking stick, returned by the restaurant owner, following Sherlock's instructions. Watson realizes he had been pretending to limp. His leg injury was fake, and Sherlock already knew. Embarrassed, Watson processes this revelation. Suddenly, Mrs. Hudson bursts in, announcing that the police have arrived. Sherlock and Watson rush upstairs to meet Inspector Lestrade and his team. Lestrade accuses Sherlock of hiding Jennifer's suitcase, which could be obstruction of justice. Sherlock dismisses the claim, saying the police entered illegally. During the search, one officer finds a pair of human eyes stored in a microwave, causing panic. Sherlock calmly explains it is part of an experiment. Lestrade warns Sherlock not to act alone without informing the police. Sherlock refocuses on the case, pointing out that Jennifer had scratched something before dying. Many think it says Rachel, but Sherlock knows it is an important clue. He believes Rachel is not just a name, but a hint about the killer. Lestrade says Rachel was supposedly Jennifer's daughter, who died 14 years ago. Watson wonders if Jennifer, poisoned and tortured, tried to leave a message pointing to her killer. Lestrade insists there is more to the story than it seems. Meanwhile, Mrs. Hudson questions the chaos in her house, worried that the police are searching for drugs. Watson couldn't believe what was happening and kept saying there were no drugs in the house. Sherlock was getting very frustrated with everyone being so slow and confused. He became more and more irritated and wanted everyone to move out of the way so he could think clearly. Sherlock thought hard about what Jennifer had done. He wondered why she had written Rachel, why she left her phone and suitcase in the taxi, and how she had carefully left a clue for them. Watson opened the suitcase and found a phone that could be traced if they had the right password. They tried to log in and realized the password was Rachel, the only hint Jennifer had given them. When they entered it, the phone showed its location, and shockingly, it was still inside the same house. Sherlock was shocked, realizing someone was controlling events very carefully and was thinking several steps ahead. He noticed another connection: the taxi. Each victim, the businessman, the boy in the rain, the drunk woman, and now Jennifer, had used a taxi before they died. The taxi was the common link between all these strange events. Then the phone got a new message: "Come with me," sent by the taxi driver. Sherlock decided to follow it, thinking it might give him important clues. Outside, Sherlock saw the taxi driver and immediately recognized him as the killer. They had almost caught him before, but they had ignored the taxi as a normal passenger vehicle. The driver admitted he was the killer and said no one would suspect a taxi driver. He claimed he didn't directly kill the 4 victims. They supposedly killed themselves after talking to him, but promised to tell everything if Sherlock rode with him. Sherlock agreed, knowing he would learn important information by going along. Inside the taxi, Sherlock looked at photographs and noticed small details. He asked the driver about who had hired him, but the driver only said it was someone who admired Sherlock's intelligence and refused to give more details. The taxi eventually stopped near a college that was being cleaned, and they quietly went inside. The driver showed 2 small bottles, each with a tablet, one deadly and one harmless, and told Sherlock to choose. The winner would survive, and the loser would die. Sherlock looked carefully at the driver. He noticed shaving cream on his neck, family photos that had been changed slightly, and old, worn clothing. These clues showed the driver was lonely, had problems with his wife, and had planned everything very carefully. The driver said he had cancer and limited time, which made him willing to take such dangerous actions. Sherlock refused to play the deadly game. The driver pointed a gun, but it was actually a fake, cleverly disguised as a lighter. Sherlock immediately saw the trick and got ready to leave. The driver tried to make him pick a tablet anyway. Sherlock hesitated, but chose one, while the driver took the other. Just as they were about to take the tablets, the driver was suddenly shot by someone unseen. Sherlock searched carefully for the shooter, but saw no one. As the driver lay dying, he whispered the name of his boss, Moriarty. Police and an ambulance arrived quickly. Sherlock realized the shooter must be highly trained, probably military and skilled at long-range shooting. Then he noticed Watson standing behind him and understood it was his friend who had saved him by shooting the driver. Sherlock decided not to tell anyone publicly and just acted like he didn't know. Later, Watson explained he had shot the driver to protect Sherlock because the tablet could have been deadly. Sherlock smiled, showing that he had never planned to take the tablet at all. It had been a trick to get more information. As they left, a man with an umbrella appeared. He had previously tried to recruit Watson to spy on Sherlock. Sherlock calmly greeted him. Watson froze in surprise when he realized this man was Sherlock's brother. Sherlock explained that his brother wasn't a criminal mastermind but worked for Britain's Secret Service. Watson slowly began to understand how serious, clever, and influential he really was. Sherlock told him that they had a lot of work ahead of them. As they walked together, Mycroft watched silently. Sherlock had never trusted anyone before, but with Watson, it was different. Their partnership seemed strong and unbreakable, and many more adventures awaited them. Now a new case began. In a London museum, a woman named AAO gave tours, showing items that were around 400 years old. A man named Surendra Yadav cared deeply for these artifacts and cleaned and polished each one personally, making sure they stayed in perfect condition. A friend named Suryanirahu Ka Kali often invited AAO to go out for a drink, but she always refused. One night, AAO was alone in the museum when she heard a strange sound. Nervously, she moved toward it and saw a statue covered with a cloth. When she lifted the cloth, she found something that terrified her. Meanwhile, Watson went shopping, but his card didn't work, so he returned home frustrated. Sherlock teased him, offering his card to make things easier. Sherlock had been dealing with a butcher earlier, but returned to sit and think quietly. Watson followed him to the bank when Sherlock decided it was time to investigate further. Sherlock noticed small details everywhere. At the bank, they met an old friend, Sarvesh, who greeted them warmly. Someone had broken into the memorial area, painted strange symbols, and drawn on a chairman's photo. CCTV footage showed that one critical minute was missing. Sherlock learned that all entrances were electronically locked. Sarvesh offered Sherlock an advance check for his help, and the investigation continued with new clues. Sherlock refused the money, but Watson, eager to feel useful and prove himself, accepted it instead, promising to pass it on to the proper authorities later. Sherlock carefully studied the strange symbols and the surroundings, paying attention to every small detail. He examined desks, angles, and lines of sight, acting a little odd to the staff, but every action helped him figure out the truth. He seemed distracted, but in reality, his mind was working fast, connecting clues that others would never notice. After careful observation, he traced the origin of the coded message to Van Kuyn, the head of the Hong Kong desk. As they left the bank, Watson asked about the conversation Sherlock had mentioned earlier. Sherlock explained that tiny details, like a watch showing the correct time but the wrong date, proved that Sarvesh had been traveling internationally. A newer model watch confirmed that Sarvesh had traveled at least twice that month, which helped Sherlock understand his movements better. Next, Sherlock and Watson prepared to follow a new lead. Watson teased Sherlock about not winning an award this time, but Sherlock stayed calm, saying it wasn't about him. It was about solving the mystery and understanding Sarvesh's actions. Sherlock noticed that the yellow paint on the chairman's photo wasn't random. It had been placed so that only someone at a specific desk could see it clearly, a secret clue carefully designed to guide the right person. The only desk that fit the requirements was Van Kuyn's, so they decided to visit his apartment. Van Kuyn lived near the top of a tall, modern building in a quiet area. When they rang the doorbell, no one answered. Watson suggested they wait for someone to return, but Sherlock noticed that the apartment above Van Kuyn's looked brand new and recently occupied. He quickly realized that a new tenant must have moved in. They rang the doorbell again, and this time a woman answered. Sherlock introduced himself as a neighbor who had forgotten his friend's keys and asked if he could step onto her balcony to retrieve them. She agreed without hesitation, letting Sherlock climb in. From there, he quietly entered Van Kuyn's flat and began examining the surroundings carefully, making sure not to leave any trace of his presence. Inside, Sherlock found Van Kuyn lying motionless on the floor with a gun in his hand. At first glance, it looked like a suicide. Sherlock immediately called the authorities, expecting his friend Officer Gregg to arrive, but a strict officer came instead. The officer warned Sherlock not to touch anything. After a quick investigation, the police concluded it was suicide and were ready to close the case. Sherlock strongly disagreed. He pointed out that Van Kuyn was left-handed, but the bullet had entered the right side of his head. A left-handed person would naturally use their left hand, making it highly unlikely that Van Kuyn had shot himself. The officer was skeptical, so Sherlock explained other clues. The phone, paper, and pen were all arranged for left-handed use. The coffee cup's handle faced left, and even the kitchen knife was placed for left-handed use. All these small details clearly showed someone else had fired the shot. The officer asked why the gun was still in Van Kuyn's hand. Sherlock explained that Van Kuyn had been ready for an intruder and had even fired a warning shot before the killer returned fire and shot him fatally. To confirm it, Sherlock suggested a forensic test on the bullet, which would show that it had come from a different gun entirely. Sherlock also wondered how the killer had entered. Unlike Sherlock, who had accessed the apartment via the balcony upstairs, the murderer must have had a cleverer, more secret method of entry. Later, Sherlock and Watson went to Van Kuyn's business associate, Sebastian, to deliver the news of his death. Sebastian was shocked, finding it impossible to believe that such a reliable and skilled man could have committed suicide. Sherlock insisted it was murder and advised him to push the police for a thorough investigation. Sebastian, however, refused to care about the employee's safety and only worried about discovering weaknesses in the bank's security system. Watson was astonished by his cold attitude, and Sherlock felt a surge of anger at Sebastian's indifference. That night, journalist Brian was returning home from the library. He saw something strange that frightened him and ran quickly toward his apartment. When he arrived, he realized someone was already inside, which made him even more scared. Meanwhile, at the National Museum, student Yao was assigned a project that had originally been meant for Sunil, who had abandoned it. Yao reluctantly accepted the task, feeling disappointed because he admired Sunil and had even invited him to hang out, but Sunil never agreed. The next day, Yao went to Sunil's apartment to check on him, but left a note under the door when no one answered. At the same time, Watson had a hospital interview that went very well. The interviewers praised his skills and knowledge, and he also felt personally attracted to one interviewer, Sarah. Excited by the opportunity, he accepted the job immediately, feeling that it was a golden chance for him. Sherlock, however, remained focused on the murder cases, thinking about the mysterious symbols and the connection between the deaths. Soon, news arrived that Brian had been found dead in his locked apartment. The situation mirrored Van Koon's case, suggesting that the same clever killer might be responsible. Sherlock tried to convince the police, but they refused to listen. He and Watson went to Brian's apartment with an officer. Sherlock studied the building's height, the apartment layout, and access points. He concluded that the killer was extremely agile, able to climb walls and jump from high places, almost like a human Spider-Man. The pattern of high-rise killings matched the previous bank break-in and other murders. Sherlock then found a clue in a book Brian had borrowed from the library, which contained a date. Acting quickly, he and Watson went to the library and found the same symbol from a bank. Sherlock realized that the killer used these symbols to scare victims, forcing them to isolate themselves before striking. The next day, Sherlock and Watson searched for a graffiti artist who might know more about the symbols. The artist recognized the symbol, but didn't understand its meaning. When the police arrived unexpectedly, Sherlock and the artist managed to escape, but Watson was left behind holding a spray can. The officer accused him of vandalism, even though he had done nothing. By then, Sherlock and the artist had vanished. Frustrated, Watson eventually ended up at the police station and later returned home. Sherlock teased him about being on a city tour, which made Watson even angrier. Watson complained about waiting at the station and his upcoming court appearance, while Sherlock reminded him to bring the officer's statement the next day. As Watson left in a taxi, he felt like someone was watching or taking pictures of him, but when he looked around, no one was there. At the station, the officer handed him Brian's diary. Meanwhile, Sherlock visited Van Koon's office to question his secretary about his last movements. He noticed an expensive hand cream on her desk and guessed that Van Koon had gifted it, since her salary could not have afforded it. They examined Van Koon's bills and travel receipts. It appeared he had returned from Guangzhou by taxi, then taken a train to his office, and had also visited a restaurant. Sherlock reasoned that the taxi must have carried a heavy parcel that was delivered somewhere in town, while the train took him to his office. Curious, he decided to investigate the restaurant. While pondering this, Sherlock ran into Watson. Sherlock explained that Van Koon had delivered a parcel and eaten at the restaurant, but no one knew where he went next, leaving a trail of mystery for them to follow. Brian's diary had an address of shop that Van Koon had visited, so Sherlock and Watson went there to investigate. Inside, they noticed a small symbol engraved under a cup. It was a Chinese character meaning the number 15. Sherlock quickly connected it with another number 1 drawn across a photo of the chairman, forming the code 150. Sherlock studied Van Koon's weekly parcels coming from China and realized that both Van Koon and Brian had been smuggling goods. He suspected that the killings happened because one of them had failed to deliver goods to the client. Unsure which one had betrayed the group, the killer marked both victims and then murdered them. While investigating further, Sherlock noticed a yellow notebook lying outside a house. It was soaked from a rainstorm 3 days earlier and belonged to Sunil Yahoo. The house looked empty, but Sherlock decided to enter anyway, sensing clues inside. Watson, unable to climb the balcony like Sherlock, stayed outside. Inside, Sherlock immediately saw signs that someone had been there recently. A flower pot was about to fall, the carpet was wet, a small athletic shoe print was visible, and fingerprints on a photo frame showed strong hands had touched it. Sherlock realized that Spider, the same agile and skilled killer from earlier, had already been there and might still be hiding. Suddenly, someone grabbed Sherlock from behind. He struggled, trying to call Watson, who threatened to break down the door. The attacker finally let go and ran, leaving behind a black rose. Sherlock found a paper from Sunil Yahoo containing a museum ticket. At the museum, they asked the staff about her and learned she had left her position, although she had taken good care of the priceless vases. Sherlock noticed one vase shining differently than the others and saw the same Chinese symbol. Outside the museum, they met the graffiti artist again, who showed them more walls with similar symbols. They went to a railway wall full of these markings. Watson tried calling Sherlock, but he didn't answer, so he went to find him. By the time Watson arrived, the wall was empty. Sherlock instructed him to remember the symbols from memory, explaining that human memory is limited but useful. Watson remembered all the symbols, even though Sherlock had already photographed them for safety. Back at home, they recorded the symbols and extracted numbers, which could only be fully understood with Sunil Yahu's help. That night, Sunil Yahu returned to the museum to work on the old vases. Sherlock confronted her, and she explained the truth. She had once been involved with a Chinese criminal group called the Black Lotus. She had left them and moved to London, working quietly at the museum. She revealed that 2 people had already been killed in locked apartments, and that her brother, Spider, was capable of climbing walls and entering anywhere, following orders from Sean, the leader of Black Lotus. The killings targeted smugglers who had failed to report valuable goods, and Spider had been sent to punish them. Sunil had hidden at the museum to stay safe. Sherlock asked Sunil to explain the numbers in the photos. She said the numbers could be decoded using a special smuggler's book, and that each smuggler had a unique tattoo. Before they could finish recording the numbers, Spider suddenly appeared in the room. He moved faster than anyone could react and killed Sunil Yahu before escaping. Sherlock and Watson rushed to the police to report the murder, frustrated that they were forced to do the police's job. They explained that Van Koon and Brian had both been smugglers linked to the Black Lotus group. The officer demanded proof, so Sherlock arranged to meet a woman named Mowley, who had examined Van Koon's and Brian's bodies. Without showing faces, Sherlock asked her to reveal the feet, where smugglers carried a specific symbol. Seeing the marks, the officer finally believed them. Sherlock then requested all smuggler record books from the victims' houses. Using these books and additional papers from Sunil, Sherlock and Watson worked all night trying to decode the numbers. They used the codes to find page numbers and extract words, experimenting with different combinations, but found no solid evidence. Exhausted, early the next morning, Watson goes to his clinic to work as a doctor. While taking a short break, he plans to meet Sarah for a date and decides to take her to a movie, thinking it will be a simple and relaxing outing. But before he can leave, Sherlock suddenly insists on coming along, saying he has something important to show. Watson doesn't really want him to join, but he agrees anyway, knowing it's impossible to stop Sherlock once he makes up his mind. When booking tickets, Watson notices 3 seats instead of 2, which confirms that Sherlock has invited himself along, just as he suspected. At the theater, Watson and Sarah watch the movie, while Sherlock quietly leaves to follow a clue he thinks is important. His search leads him to a strange golden spray bottle. Before he can examine it properly, someone attacks him from behind. They struggle briefly, but Sherlock escapes and goes back to his room to carefully think more about the case. Meanwhile, Sarah notices unusual writing on a photo that Watson had taken earlier. Sherlock had kept this photo with him. It was the same one found near a sacred shivling, where a dying man named Schiller had carved the letter E. Sherlock tries to figure out what this letter might mean, focusing on every small detail. Outside, Sherlock spots a prayer book called Exit London, the same type he had seen in Van and Lunge's homes before. He quickly takes one and decodes it. The message says that a hairpin worth $9 million was stolen by one of 2 men, and Sherlock now knows it is very important to solve the case quickly. At the same time, the dangerous Black Lotus gang mistakes Watson for Sherlock and kidnaps both him and Sarah. Sherlock notices symbols painted on walls and realizes they are warnings that mean dead man. He immediately understands that Watson and Sarah are in danger. The gang leader threatens Watson, demanding the location of the stolen hairpin and also threatening Sarah. Watson feels helpless, crying out as he tries to protect her. Just as Sarah is about to be harmed, Sherlock arrives and saves them. There is a chaotic shootout. Many gang members are caught, but the leader manages to escape. After this terrifying event, Sarah seems unsure about going on another date with Watson. Watson tries to lighten the mood and jokes that there probably won't be another date anyway, trying to make her smile. Soon, Sherlock meets Van's former assistant. He notices a luxury hand wash bottle on her table, the same type he saw at Van's home. Van wasn't the kind of person to care about cleanliness, so Sherlock thinks he must have been with someone special. He suspects Van and had been in a relationship, and confirms they were together, but broke up. She remembers that Van had gone to China suddenly and returned with a hairpin as a gift for her. She thought it was just a cheap trinket, but Sherlock reveals it is actually worth $9 million, and is stunned and speechless. Elsewhere, the Lotus gang leader talks to someone over a laptop. She promises to remain silent, but the mysterious person kills her anyway, showing how dangerous this criminal world is. Back in London, Sherlock is feeling bored without new cases. Watson goes to meet Sarah, but suddenly, there is a massive explosion in their building. Panicked, Watson rushes back, but he finds Sherlock safe, sitting calmly with his brother Mycroft. Mycroft has a new case. One of his employees, Westy, was found dead near railway tracks. Westy had a pen drive with secret missile plans, but it is missing. Mycroft asks Sherlock to investigate, but Sherlock refuses to take the case immediately. Shortly after, Inspector Lestrade calls about a suspicious package addressed to Sherlock. At the police station, they open it and find a pink phone, similar to one from an earlier case. The phone rings and sends coded beeps, followed by a frightening message. Sherlock explains that gangs use such signals as death warnings. A picture shows a storeroom, and then a terrified woman speaks on the phone, strapped with explosives. She says Sherlock has 9 hours to save her. The picture is of the basement in Sherlock's own building. Sherlock rushes there and finds an old pair of shoes. He takes them to his lab, where Molly is working. She introduces her new boyfriend, Jim, to make Sherlock jealous, but Sherlock immediately realizes Jim is gay, which embarrasses Molly. Sherlock asks Watson to examine the shoes. Watson notices some useful details, but Sherlock observes even more. The shoes are over 20 years old, polished and repaired many times. The lace is changed, and there are traces of skin showing the owner had eczema. They are a special 1999 edition, now discontinued. Soil in the shoes shows they were worn in a place called Islam, but the outer dirt matches London. Sherlock remembers a childhood case of Carl Powers, a young swimmer who drowned mysteriously. Carl's shoes were missing back then. These are the same shoes. Sherlock checks old newspaper clippings to confirm his suspicions. Mycroft tells Watson more about Westy. The night he died, he left his girlfriend suddenly, and the next morning was found dead near railway tracks, without a train ticket. Clearly, he wasn't traveling anywhere. Sherlock discovers poison in the foot cream inside the shoes. Carl had eczema and used cream often, and the poison caused his muscles to fail, making him drown. Sherlock sends this solution to the bomber. The woman is saved safely. But then the phone beeps again. There's still 5 more cases to solve. The next photo shows a car, traced to a rental agency rented by Ian Top. Sherlock and Watson visit Ian's wife. They then question the rental agency owner, and Sherlock watches him very carefully, noticing every small detail. Sherlock notices that a man has a slight tan, which shows he had recently been somewhere sunny. When Sherlock asks for small change, the man opens his wallet, and Sherlock sees Colombian money inside. This proves the man was lying about not traveling. Outside, Sherlock explains to Watson that the man is hiding something and that they need to pay attention to small details. Later, Sherlock looks carefully at the car linked to Ian. There are blood stains, but they are old, not fresh, which means someone put them there on purpose to trick people. Combining this with the man's sunburn and the Colombian money, Sherlock figures out the truth. Ian is alive and hiding in Colombia. Ian, who had been struggling as a banker, faked his death to claim insurance money. His wife and the rental car owner were helping him, planning to share the money once it was received. Sherlock quickly sends this solution to the bomber, and the boy who had been kidnapped is safely released. Soon after, another case arrives. This time, the phone sends 3 beeps, followed by a picture of Connie Prince, a TV celebrity who had died only a few days before. The bomber gives Sherlock 12 hours to solve it. The police soon find another hostage, an elderly woman strapped with explosives inside her flat. Connie had been famous for hosting a makeover show, where she often mocked people on television. Reports said she died from an infection caused by a scratch she got while gardening. Their servant, Rahul, provided this information to the police. Sherlock, however, notices something strange. The wound showed very little blood, which means it was inflicted after her death. Watson talks to Connie's brother while Sherlock continues investigating, pretending to be part of a camera crew for the show. Watson wonders if the family cat may have been poisoned, but Sherlock quickly dismisses that idea. Sherlock soon figures out that Connie was deliberately murdered. Her brother wanted revenge because she had humiliated him on live TV. He used Rahul to poison one of Connie's regular cosmetic injections. Obsessed with beauty treatments, Connie unknowingly took the poison shot, which killed her. Sherlock forwards this solution to the authorities, saving the elderly woman just in time. Unfortunately, before she could be fully rescued, the bomber detonates the device remotely, killing her along with 11 others. Watson is devastated by this loss and struggles to process the tragedy. Next, a new message arrives showing a valuable painting. At night, Sherlock, Watson, and Inspector Lestrade go to examine it. Sherlock immediately says the painting is fake. Watson and Lestrade are amazed and baffled at how he could tell so quickly. Sherlock explains that the victim in this case had been murdered in a way that matches the work of a famous assassin called the Golem, who is known for leaving no evidence behind. Sherlock inspects the victim's belongings. A torn pocket shows a missing badge, which means the man worked as a security guard. His watch was set for night shifts and had never been changed. He also carried a ticket from a museum. Soon after, news confirms that a guard named Alex, who worked at the Hitman Gallery, has gone missing. The gallery was preparing to sell a masterpiece worth $30 million. Sherlock realizes that Alex must have discovered the painting was fake, so the gallery management hired the Golem to silence him. Sherlock and Watson go to the gallery, but notice something unusual. The bomber is acting differently this time. Previously, he always gave a time limit and messages from the hostages, but now there is complete silence. Sherlock sends Watson to Alex's home for more information. Watson learns that Alex loved astronomy and often observed the stars with his telescope. On the night he disappeared, he had even spoken to a professor about the stars. Meanwhile, Sherlock studies the painting again and insists it is a forgery. He confronts the gallery manager, who denies any wrongdoing, but Sherlock remains unsatisfied. At the same time, Watson continues investigating Westy's death for Mycroft. Westy's girlfriend insists he would never betray his country by selling missile data, which raises doubts about the original theory of his murder. Sherlock encounters the Golem, but is unable to capture him. Fearing that the professor who spoke to Alex might be the next target, Sherlock rushes to her home. Sadly, the Golem attacks and kills her before Sherlock and Watson could stop him. Another hostage call comes in. A little girl's life is at stake. Sherlock must prove the gallery painting is fake. Under pressure, he finally notices a small detail. The painting shows a shooting star that appeared in 1858, but the painting was made in 1640, long before that event. This confirms it is a fake. The girl is rescued just in time. Sherlock recalls that Alex, being an astronomy enthusiast, had noticed the same flaw, which is why he was killed. The gallery manager eventually confesses, but reveals a chilling detail. She was working with a mysterious man named Moriarty. Meanwhile, Watson continues his investigation into Westy. He notices there is no blood at the railway site, which proves the body was moved. Sherlock, secretly tracking Watson, appears, and together they confront Westy's colleague, Joe. Under pressure, Joe admits that Westy had the missile data on a pen drive. During a confrontation, Joe accidentally pushed Westy down the stairs, killing him. He then placed the body on a train to cover it up, and it later fell onto the tracks. Sherlock recovers the stolen data, solving Mycroft's case along with the 4 bomber puzzles. Only the final challenge remains. At night, Sherlock arranges a meeting with the bomber at a swimming pool. He brings the missile plans, knowing this was the true target all along. But he is shocked. Watson is strapped with explosives as the 5th victim. Then Moriarty reveals himself. Sherlock is stunned to see that Moriarty is Jim, the man Molly had once introduced as her boyfriend. Moriarty had been hiding in plain sight, tricking Sherlock by using his own methods of deduction. Red laser dots from hidden snipers appear on Sherlock and Watson, showing that they are completely surrounded. Moriarty threatens them both, saying they must die. Sherlock quickly raises his gun at Moriarty. The scene freezes in a tense standoff, and then cuts to black.